The Oak and the Fairy Tale. Once upon a time, thought the burly old oak tree, people used to believe in fairy tales. He knew this because he experienced generations of children clad in colorful fabrics resting in the cool shade of his boughs, reading aloud from tomes entitled Fairy Tales, words that crafted imaginative worlds filled with exotic intrigue and unexpected characters. That was the time when time was forever, and the wind brought little change to the land. Beneath the rocky hillside, where his gnarled roots held the slopes together, while giddy little shrubs and flowers speckled the grasses with color as breezes twirled and leapt among them. But now only one very little girl would clamber up the hill to talk and read to him. And then she too came no more. No one paid attention to the oaks, or the flowers, or the wind. There were still children, yes. He saw them wandering below the hill, heads bowed, foreheads way too wrinkled for creatures so young, immersed in little rectangular machines cupped possessively in their youthful hands, oblivious to the rustle of leaves above or the clever footwork of the agile currents of air. And no one spoke of fairy tales anymore, until one day a slightly older girl came slowly crawling up the hill. It wasn't so steep, but her face was pale as she struggled to climb. With dragging footsteps and a large book clutched under one arm, she reached the venerable old oak, leaned against the wide bole, then slid slowly down the bark, crumbling onto the ground, where she released the burden of her book and nudged it beneath the rise of a root. With no one around, she began to speak. I know you are only a tree, so you can't understand me, but I could always talk to you when I was young. I know it's silly, but I felt somehow that you always listened to me when no one else heard, and when no one else cared. And you traveled with me through so many amazing worlds in these fairy tales. The doctors, well, they say I'm ill and they may not be able to fix me. So I needed to find you one more time, to give you my book, to feel close to you again, to see the colors and smell the plants and feel the breezes. She hailed in the afternoon air, and her eyelids closed slowly as she drifted asleep. The oak saw the labored rise and fall of her chest, and thought he couldn't move his branches or his roots to protect her further, but he pulled all the energy from the earth below and the air above and surrounded the fragile child with his love. That was all he could do. After all, despite his massive size and the wisdom of so great an age, he was only an oak tree. The sun slid soundlessly behind the hills, and the shadows, they chilled the air, waking the sleeping girl. She shook her head and looked up to the leafy crown above and smiled. Thank you. I feel a little better. This is for you, she whispered, leaving her book on the ground as she rose unsteadily. That was the last day the old oak saw her, watching the youngster stumble awkwardly down the hillside. Since time moves more slowly for a venerable old oak tree, no one saw the old oak slowly lift his root over the storybook while nudging at a large rock, covering just everything but a little corner of the book. Lost in the thought of fairy tales, the old oak drifted away into the tides of time, until suddenly the ground shuddered and startled him out of his reverie. Time had woven changes all around him. The few houses in the valley had turned into a construction zone, and all around there was noise and dust, vibrations and acrid smells. New buildings had appeared below the hill, and vehicles raced around with meaningless motions, erratic rhythms, faster and faster, louder and louder. Suddenly, the view was alive with human activity fretting among the whirling wheel machinery. A rough dirt road had been carved into the side of the hill, all as he had slept. Great steel jaws bit into the top of the hillside and swallowed up the piece, regurgitating his world into truckload after truckload of metal caskets, to carry off the top of his hill to a place beyond anything he could imagine. So many trees were gone now. The old oak felt lost, alone and abandoned, and for the first time ever, fearful. A woman stood close by with a clipboard, delegating orders as workers scurried about. And suddenly, everything seemed to stop. The woman caught her breath and stared at the old oak tree. And he knew her. Clinging to her clipboard, she approached and gingerly touched the roughened bark. "I don't want to do this, my old friend," she whispered. "But there are valuable materials inside this hill, and we need to take them. The business my father had is, well, it's mine now, and we need to make a profit. We need to create jobs, and I can't look weak. So many of these workers already don't think I'm capable just because I'm a woman. And you have to go too, my friend. You understand, don't you?" The noise went on all around them as her fingers hung on to the bark, and then her eyes caught the edge of something buried under a rock and held in place with a thick root. She grabbed a shovel from a pile of tools nearby and dug carefully around the root and the rock, liberating the remains of a fairy tale book that by all rights should never have survived all these years. Desiccated cardboard and rigid paper crumbled through her palms. When the last page offered up the faded moments of printed words, she saw, "And they lived happily ever after." She looked all around her. Tears ran embarrassingly down her cheeks and blurred her eyes, and suddenly she was transported back over a decade, back to a dream when she had fallen asleep right in this same spot, feeling so weak and ill, and had awoken in the cool of the coming evening, feeling like it was something amazing that had changed deep within. Then came the weeks when the doctors kept saying it was a miracle, and her strength returned, and the world grew bright, and she set off to conquer that world. But did she really want to conquer the world, she suddenly wondered. Was this tree possibly responsible for her magical recovery? What was she doing with her life anyway? Or was she a part of an energy that was somehow... No, never mind. But she slid down the trunk of the old tree, shaken by something indescribable shifting inside her. People came to her with questions. What should they do next? Was she okay? But she sat in a daze under the shade of the oak until everyone slowly went away for the evening, muttering in confusion, and dusk set in, and she quietly went away too. The days passed and no one returned, and after a week some of the machinery was removed, rattling down the rough road into the valley, and then the rest disappeared, and still no one returned, until months later the woman returned with a man and a big sign that was posted on the dirt road. It said, "Jobs available. Landscapers and maintenance workers needed." Then in big letters, "The Healing Nature Center, opening soon."